Okay, Torsten, go ahead and let's get started.
Right. Good morning. Welcome to the Disability, Intersectionality, and Social Justice Symposium, a symposium that we hope will be repeated at some point in the future. This series of events for the next 2 days is hosted by the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee, and we would hope that you visit our website for more information on disability resources and inclusive pedagogy. We are grateful for the financial support that we have received from our sponsors. Let me mention them here: the President's Fund for the Humanities, the President's DEI Grant, and the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. There are 2 sessions planned for this morning: a keynote speech and a breakout session at 10:30. I have the great pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, nationally recognized writer, scholar, attorney, activist, and politician. I'm probably leaving something out here, Lydia X.Z. Brown. Thank you for being here, Lydia. It is an honor to meet you and to have you anchor our symposium. Lydia X.Z. Brown will be introduced by our provost, Constancio Nakuma. Good morning, provost. You have the virtual floor.
Good morning, Torsten, and good morning, all participants. Good morning, Lydia, and welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm Constancio Nakuma, Provost at CU Denver, and it's my distinct honor to welcome you here. To the participants, Lydia X.Z. Brown is an advocate, organizer, educator, attorney, strategist, and writer. Their work focuses on addressing state and interpersonal violence, targeting disabled people living at the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, faith, language, and nation. They work to address and end interpersonal and state violence, targeting disabled people, especially disabled people at the margins of the margins, in our own homes and communities, in movement spaces, in schools, in disability-specific institutions, and in jails and prisons. They are Policy Council for Disability Rights and Algorithmic Fairness for the Privacy and Data Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and Director of Policy, Advocacy, and External Affairs for the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. Lydia currently serves as a member of the American Bar Association's Commission on Disability Rights, chairperson of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Section's Disability Rights Committee, and representative of the Disability Justice Committee to the National Lawyers Guild's National Executive Committee. They also serve on the board of directors of the Alliance for Citizen Director Supports and on advisory boards for organizations including Transgender Law Center, the Kelsey, Borealis Philanthropy, the Laurie Institute for Disability Policy, the Non-Binary and Intersex Recognition Project, and Vera Institute for Justice. Lydia founded the Fund for Community Reparations for Autistic People of Color's Interdependence, Survival, and Empowerment in partnership with Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. They are past Gender Plus Justice Initiative Fellow at Georgetown University and a Justice Catalyst Fellow at the Beslon Center for Mental Health Law. They created and curate Bearing Witness, Demanding Freedom, the living archive and repository of Judge Rothenberg Center's abuses. Lydia is adjunct lecturer in disability studies at Georgetown University and adjunct professorial lecturer in American Studies at American University's Department of Critical Race, Gender, and Culture Studies. Previously, they taught at Tufts University as a visiting lecturer for Experimental College. And finally, they are currently running to be a state delegate for the Massachusetts House. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker.
Good morning, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. My name is Lydia Brown. My pronouns are they, them. I am a youngish East Asian person with short black hair and glasses, today wearing a dark polo, a jade pendant, and behind me is what I refer to as one of my fake Zoom mansions, one of the places where I pretend that I live. This particular fake Zoom mansion has soaring glass and angular ceiling, exposed stone, wood, metal, and concrete, with angular and modular furniture in the mid-century modern style. And through the windows of my fake Zoom mansion is a glistening lake and beautiful savanna and grassland. I really wish I lived there, but I can pretend for the sake of Zoom. I actually encourage anyone who hasn't done this to experiment with creating your own fake Zoom mansion situation. Thorsten's on the way with the beautiful view of Colorado behind, but if you haven't done this, it's a great way to be able to imagine what kind of beautiful place you could live in that you do not currently live in. Before we continue with our conversation today, a reminder for those who just joined, I would love to see your cats and dogs. Send pictures of your floofs to the phone number in the chat. That is the unofficial tax for participation in today's symposium on disability and intersectionality. And I will be deeply gratified and appreciative of seeing all of your wonderful floofs. Bonus, tell me their names and some funny story about them. As we begin our time together today, I wish to open with an invitation and an invocation. I do this at all of my facilitations and presentations. I do this whether I'm speaking to a small group of a handful of people or a large group of hundreds or thousands. This is an invitation for us to take a moment of pause to consider what it is that we have carried into the space with us together today. To consider whether you are here now and have not yet attended to your body's basic need for food, for drink. Have you nourished yourself? Have you had something to eat or drink yet this morning? And if you have not, then this is a little gentle nudge, a reminder that you are welcome to grab something to eat or drink while we are here. This is a webinar. We don't see you. We won't know. And you should nourish your body, mind, and needs. This is an invitation to consider what it is you've carried with you into this space, not simply in terms of material needs, but in the feelings and the weight of those feelings that you've carried today. Have you brought with you to this space your excitement, your joy, your eager anticipation, your gratitude? Have you brought to this space your exhaustion and bone weariness? Have you carried into this space your grief, your sorrow, or your mourning? Have you carried into this space your anger or rage, the righteous fury of generations of ancestors and elders? Have you carried to this space your anxieties and fears, your uncertainties, your trauma? What is it that you have carried with you into this space today? We are moving rapidly into the colder part of fall and winter. Diwali has ended, Sukkot has ended. We are approaching the span of artificially created national holidays, celebrating a legacy of settler colonialism and genocide. The seasons are literally changing. We carry that weight with us. And so I ask you, I invite you to consider what you are carrying written in your skin, buried in your bones, hidden in your soul. What do you carry with you to today's space? This is a reminder to you that if you have access to the resources, the support necessary to ask for your needs to be met and for those needs to indeed be met, that you are not a burden or a problem for asking for your needs to be met and seeking to meet those needs. And this is also a reminder that if you are currently in a space where it is not possible for you to ask for your needs to be met, it is not safe, you do not have the resources, you are not in a space where this is a possibility, that too is not a reflection on your value or your worth or your personhood, but rather a reminder to all of us who are gathered here today of the work left to be done, of the work left in our world making, in our community building, of the care work in which we all share responsibility. Because disability justice teaches us, if absolutely nothing else, that to have needs is to be human, that our needs deserve to be met, that our body minds are worthy in all of their complexities and intricacies, that we are worthy, that we are worthy and deserving of that care, of that support, of justice. So the second note that I want to make sure to share with you is a quick note on content. For the remainder of our time together today, I will be speaking at points about issues and experiences of trauma, of deprivation, and violence. I will not be showing any videos or imagery or audio recordings that depict any acts of violence. I will not be giving any graphic or detailed descriptions of any forms of violence, but there will be some discussion in non-graphic, brief detail about some experiences related to trauma and violence. And so if at any time you need to take a pause, to hit the mute button, to remove yourself from the room, to change the scenery, to leave and return later, you are welcome and invited to do so, again, to attend to your bodily, mind, and needs, just as you are welcome throughout this time together to be outdoors, to be inside, to be lying down or moving or still. If at any time you find that you no longer have the capacity to participate or to engage, then you are also welcome and invited to withdraw from the space for the time and to return later to this time. I believe that our session is being recorded and that you will therefore be able to access it later. I'm seeing a nod from Colleen, so I can confirm that. If you need to withdraw from this time at a certain point, you will be able to access this later and then to review the conversation that took place. I do not believe in the type of advocacy or speaking truth that expects constant re-traumatization or shocking people who often come from the directly impacted community into caring about or understanding our experiences of trauma. The expectation to perform our trauma, to put our trauma on display, to teach only through examples of the worst, most dramatized forms of narrative about our trauma certainly has a place and can be a powerful tool in our work for social change. But in many of our spaces like this one, the people who are gathered by and large are people who've already experienced or witnessed or survived that trauma. I don't believe in pretending that our group is somehow removed from or isolated or shielded from the experiences and the topics that we discuss. And moreover, I don't believe in centering as default or normative the experiences of those people who are privileged enough not to have experienced such trauma by presuming that those who are present have never lived it. The stories and the topics that we'll be discussing today undoubtedly have affected many of your lives, or the lives of those with whom you work, with whom you live, and with whom you struggle alongside in our work toward freedom, justice. I know that they are stories and narratives that arise out of my own experiences that affect my own life as well. And so I ask you and invite you to take care and to be gentle with yourself and with one another. As we begin our time now, I want to set the tone a little bit for our conversation and ground this in the present moment. We are now almost 3 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. 3 years. And during that time, each and every one of us has carried the weight of expectation that we perform wellness, functionality, that we are performing productivity and industriousness, that we are performing all of the trappings of able normativity, that is, the expectation that we live and move through the world as if we are not affected by illness, by injury, by disability, or by trauma. The expectation that the way we work, the pace at which we work, how we relate to the work that we do, how we exist in public and shared spaces as people, as neighbors, as students, as teachers, as professionals, must be marked by a constant performance of doing enough, appearing to be functional enough, meeting deadlines, having the right attitude, embracing this nebulous idea of what constitutes normal, at least as defined by abled people, certainly not by sick and mad and neurodivergent and disabled people. My friend and colleague, Mimi Cook, speaking shortly before the pandemic began, offered this reflection on the nature of the ableism we live with. The picture on screen shows a smiling, youngish Southeast Asian person with short black hair in front of bright green foliage. The quote says, "We live and work in a machine that requires us to be well, that does not allow us to be unwell, that punishes us for being unwell, and that asks us to punish others for being unwell in order to prove that we are well." What Mimi is sharing here is a reflection on the deeply damaging and all-pervasive nature of the ableist values that were already infused into our culture before COVID-19 began, and that became exemplified in our response to and our existence within and during this ongoing pandemic. I remember in the middle of March 2020, as likely happened for many of you, that for people who were working or studying in any space that technically does not have to be done 100% in person. So I'm not talking about work such as being a barista or being a heart surgeon or a bus driver. I'm talking about academic work. I'm talking about nonprofit work. I'm talking about studentship. Those of us in those spaces for part or all of our time suddenly faced the expectation to transition abruptly and completely into a fully virtual environment with no regard for teaching support needs, no regard for class differences and who could afford to go home and who could afford to stay, no accounting for who had access to privacy or safety at home, no accounting for who had access to software tools that work with their brain or their body, no accounting for illness, for trauma, for the fact that we were all experiencing and are still experiencing collective crisis on top of collective trauma, that we did not know how severe the virus could be, exactly how contagious it might be, how transmissible, whether we or those we loved would live or would die. But still, we were expected with 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the institution or the organization, to suddenly be fully functional, to avoid missing synchronous meeting times, to avoid missing existing deadlines or assessments, and I know as happened with many of my colleagues, to participate in and manufacture additional assignments simply to prove that workers and students were still productive, still engaged, still maintaining the same rigor of coursework and production as before classes and work moved online. This was in large part, I believe, driven by the profoundly classist and racist belief that virtual or distance education is presumed to be inherently inferior to or lesser than in-person offerings. A belief that I believe has long attached to the association of distance learning or correspondence courses with students who are more likely to be non-traditional older students returning to school, students with elder care or childcare responsibilities, working class or lower middle class students who are working in order to put themselves through school, students with disabilities that were not sufficiently supported or accommodated to pursue college at an earlier age, the conventional or traditional age to do so, students who've experienced homelessness, students who are returning veterans, students who've been or are presently incarcerated, students who are in otherwise unstable or precarious housing situations. In other words, student populations that are disproportionately, if not overwhelmingly, working class, students of color, immigrants and refugees, disabled, queer and trans, and impacted directly by carceral systems. Because of that association with flexible, hybrid, distance, and virtual learning with online schools and the proliferation of for-profit exploitative online education programs targeting those very same populations, many universities that conventionally provide most of their degree offerings, their credit-bearing course offerings in an in-person environment, manufactured implicitly or explicitly an expectation that faculty and students alike would need to overcompensate for this perception of online education as inferior or lesser in order to prove that their educational offerings were not lower in quality, degraded somehow, lesser, or negatively impacted because they were no longer able to be offered online. This created a burden and an expectation of work that fell and continues to fall disproportionately on those who were already most marginalized within academic spaces. For me, what I remember most about early 2020 was that less than 1 month before we went into lockdown nationally, I got a concussion. It was my first semester teaching after a couple of years of not being a teacher in higher education. And I was teaching a 400 level seminar that was primarily focused on small discussion of highly theoretical readings and literature with significant writing expectations for students. I had a concussion, and so for the 4 weeks leading up to going into lockdown, I remember struggling through class. I don't remember much of what happened in my seminar. According to my student evaluations at the end of it, it apparently went really well, unless they were all just trying to make me feel better about myself. I don't know, but there were some very nice comments at the end of that semester. But I don't remember most of it because I was struggling to function while recovering from a concussion. And 4 weeks in, we moved online. While my concussion doctor was telling me, you should not be looking at screens. Also, you should not be using your brain for complex higher order thinking. And I'm thinking, I'm teaching a 400 level seminar and there's an pandemic that is making us all quarantine and use screens for our work. So you're telling me to not do my job, any of my job. My full-time work is in policy and legal research and advocacy, which last time I checked also requires complex higher order thinking, and currently staring at my screen for 8 to 12 hours a day. So you're telling me to not do my job that does things like provide health insurance that pays you to provide treatment to me. Sounds perfect. That's sarcasm. But in our profoundly ableist society, one in which ableist values shape the way that we work and our societal structures, like our health care system and our health insurance system, right? The expectation was, well, in order to receive care, you need to work. And if your work happens to be directly contradictory to medical advice, that sounds like a you problem. Now we're in a global pandemic. That same month, my partner lost their job. And yet, like everyone else I know in academic and advocacy work, the expectation was keep working. Not even at the same pace as before COVID-19, but at an accelerated, more frantic, more urgent pace instead. We saw in the months after March 2020, the extremely, disgustingly outsized impact of COVID-19 in the lives of those at the margins. Where is COVID-19 the most transmissible? Homeless shelters, nursing homes and group homes, and jails and prisons. Why? Because in a congregate setting, there's no room for isolation. In an institutional setting, there's little opportunity to exercise individual health practices and little control over the policies and practices affecting others around you. And who is disproportionately homeless or incarcerated or institutionalized? Largely queer and trans and Black and brown disabled people. We saw the impact of COVID-19 in the lives of people whose jobs cannot be performed virtually or in a hybrid format, whose jobs do not allow for distancing, who do not have job protections because we don't have protections nationally and in most states that ensure that workers can take as much sick leave, paid sick leave as they need for themselves or to care for others in their family or in their lives. Workers who are disproportionately in wage-paid jobs, in contract positions, in front-facing, customer-facing jobs, who again disproportionately come from other marginalized communities. We've seen the impact of COVID-19 in explicitly and openly devaluing disabled people's lives. Disabled people who make up a significant portion of the workforce in precarious work, disabled people who are disproportionately overrepresented in every single marginalized community there is, disabled people who are at higher risk of severe illness, longer COVID, and death from infection. We see now, just as before, when hospitals were triaging equipment and supplies and explicitly disavowing disabled life and its worth, we see now in public policies, in institutions, and by government alike, a disregard for all collective public safety and public health measures, for the comfort and convenience of those who have the least to lose, for the comfort and convenience of those who have never had to navigate the world while chronically ill or disabled, leaving us behind and forcing those disabled people who are in the most precarious positions with work and with housing at the mercy of an unchecked ongoing pandemic. The problem that we struggle with, as we name it in disability justice spaces, is the problem of ableism. This is a term that undoubtedly many of you are familiar with to some degree or another. You might define it, as many do, as some type of prejudice or bias impacting disabled people, perhaps as related to stereotypes. You might define it as oppression, as I do. Ableism at its core is a system of values and beliefs, a system of thinking and doing that targets disabled people and harms everyone in the process. What I mean by this is that first and foremost, ableism singles out for harm all those people who are considered to be identified as or perceived as disabled, regardless of whether the law would agree, regardless of whether medical professionals would agree, regardless of whether any particular person or group of people might use the word disability or the language of disability to describe themselves. Those people who are considered to be or recognized as disabled in any particular relevant context or situation are the ones who are directly targeted by ableism for violence, for exclusion, for discrimination, for deprivation, for exploitation, for extraction. At the same time, ableism harms everyone. It has ripple effects because if it is a system of values and beliefs, it is not limited only to those who are considered to be or perceived as disabled. As disability justice advocate Talila Lewis says, quote, "You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism," unquote. Ableism as a system of values teaches all of us who is human, what the characteristics of personhood are, what kinds of body, minds, and characteristics are valuable, worthy, and desirable. And simultaneously, what kinds of body, minds, and characteristics are expendable and disposable. Ableism, in other words, is a form of structural, systemic, and institutional oppression. It is a system of power relations and power differentials, wherein those people whose bodies and minds are considered to be healthy, whole, well, functional, stable, sane, strong, intelligent, and beautiful, are granted or take enormous political, social, cultural, and economic power at the direct expense of those people whose bodies and minds are instead construed as sick, broken, weak, defective, deficient, disordered, deviant, unwell, crazy, dumb, or ugly. Ableism teaches us what kinds of people ought to be allowed to live, to breathe, to be, to exist, to take up space, quite literally. And what kinds of people instead must be subjugated, disappeared, controlled, managed, eliminated, or prevented from coming into existence again. As a system of values and beliefs, as a form of oppression, ableism is both necessary for and dependent upon every other form of oppression that exists. Fundamentally, ableism is profoundly racist and white supremacist, deeply wrapped up in the logics of settler colonialism and settler nationalism, dependent upon and reliant upon the logic of global imperialism now. What I mean by that is that within the system of ableism, we are taught to understand and to think of disability from an entirely privilege-centric lens or framework, to define under white supremacy both abledness and disabledness against whiteness. What this means is that we are taught to define whiteness and ableness as defining one another. Another term for that is co-constitutive. That to be white is to be defined as virulent, strong, healthy, well, sane, smart, and beautiful. Which, of course, is why white disabled people are taught by ableism and white supremacist ideologies that in order to fully benefit from their whiteness, they must hide, mask, overcome, heal from, or be cured of their disabilities. It is the same way in which whiteness is attached to other experiences of privilege and normativity. Queer white people are taught that the way to earn back respectability is to mirror patriarchal heterosexual relations and family structures, just changing the gender. Poor white people are taught to invest in the logics of individualism and capitalist extraction and exploitation, to distance themselves from poor people of color in order to gain the illusory promise of whiteness as defined by capitalist success and resource hoarding. At the same time, we are taught to define disabledness too as attached to negative racialization. When disability shows up in a privileged context among white or wealth-privileged people, for example, the type of ableism that commonly manifests is a belief that the white disabled person or otherwise privileged disabled person, but for their disability, should be met with pity and charity, the belief that they simply need help, if only from a hyper tragedy-oriented and medicalized perspective. But when disability instead shows up in an otherwise marginalized context, particularly around race or class or gender, that disability is instead usually met with a type of ableism that paints the disability as dangerous or threatening. This is why, for instance, Black and brown children in our schools are both less likely to be accurately or early identified with disabilities that are more likely to be attached to ideas of whiteness and innocence. And at the same time, Black and brown children in our schools are more likely to be labeled with disabilities that are explicitly stigmatized as dangerous, like conduct, behavioral, and emotional disorders and disturbance, and likely to be segregated into isolated special education classrooms and schools, leading to later criminalization. These realities are true at the same time because of how our understanding of disability and the ways that ableism operates are intricately and inevitably tied up with our understandings of race. Ableism has existed and wended its way throughout the contours of US history from past to present. From the creation and the settlement of this nation through forced dispossession and removal of Native and Indigenous peoples, cultures, tribes, nations, and civilizations, genocide, land theft, and mass incarceration through the boarding school system, the logics of ableism have always been at work, positioning white, Christian, European settlers as inherently superior to Indigenous and Native peoples, civilizations, tribes, nations, and cultures, and needing either to eliminate Native and Indigenous people as a threat to whiteness and settler colonialism, or to forcibly assimilate through linguistic and cultural genocide the same peoples and their children, but call it benevolent. The logic of ableism wends its way through the history of chattel enslavement, where white slaveholders literally invented fictional categories of mental illness to pathologize enslaved Black people for wishing to be free or escaping to freedom. An enslaved Black person would be diagnosed with the mental illness of drapetomania for attempting to escape. The logic of ableism wends its way through the histories of our immigration laws and policies. In the 1924 Immigration and Naturalization Act, issuance and eligibility for visas is precluded for people deemed likely to become a public charge. That is, people who were perceived as likely to rely upon or receive public benefits or subsidies, which are disproportionately attached to and connected with ideas about disability and dependency, ideas that are deeply tied up in notions of race and class. Ableism has affected the ways in which rhetoric surrounding yellow peril has positioned East Asian migrant workers as at once an economic threat to white workers, as well as created the conditions that explain why we now have passport photos. There were not photographs and passports until widespread fears stoked by white elites that immigrating East Asian women were coming solely to perform sex work, and an induced moral panic about sex work carried out by East Asian women led to the imposition of a requirement for passport photos as some kind of tool to promote morality and good character among those to whom visas were issued. We do not tend to think about disability outside of this very privileged framework, historically or currently, because even our ideas of what constitutes a disability are deeply wrapped up with ideas of whiteness and privilege. We do not tend, for example, to think of as disabilities those disabilities directly caused by war, genocide, and displacement. We do not tend to think about trauma itself as a disabling experience, including historical, intergenerational, and collective trauma. The traumas carried literally, this has been documented in epigenetic changes in descendants of enslaved Black people and descendants of Holocaust survivors. We do not tend to think about as disabilities those disabilities caused, for example, by widespread use of Agent Orange and napalm during the Vietnamese War. We do not tend to think about the fact that lingering injuries and long-term disabilities, both because of trauma and those that are physical disabilities, are caused directly by militarism and empire. We do not think about the reality that Cambodia is the most bombed country on the planet, about generations of East and Southeast Asian people who survived bombings, nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific Islands, particularly the Bikini Islands atoll, which has been rendered uninhabitable by US military nuclear weapons testing, uninhabitable for its indigenous inhabitants. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those caused by ongoing genocidal action and occupation in Tibet, in Palestine, or in Tigray, and many other places around the world. We do not tend to think about the impact of constant exposure to a lifetime of racism or anti-Semitism or anti-trans oppression as contributing to and exacerbating experiences of disability. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities caused by industrial accidents and workplace injury, caused and enabled by unsafe, exploitative working conditions. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities more closely associated with other marginalized communities, like hepatitis C and HIV and AIDS that are closely associated with the LGBTQ community, or conditions like sickle cell anemia, or lupus, or fibromyalgia that are more common in Black communities, and many of which are more common specifically in estrogen-dominant Black people. We do not tend to think about conditions like Turner's or Tay-Sachs, T-A-Y-S-A-C-H-S, as disabilities, those conditions that are more common in Ashkenazi Jewish communities. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those experiences caused with autoimmune disorders, cancers, or asthma brought on by unsafe, neglected housing that's disproportionately inflicted upon Black and Brown communities subjected to rodent and insect infestations, to unsafe drinking water, to unsafe building conditions. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities caused by the ongoing violence of family separation and incarceration, our climate crisis, or even the experience of long COVID. We are taught not to think of as disabilities those conditions and experiences that we associate with other forms of marginalization, and yet that is where ableism thrives. Ableism thrives in teaching us both that it is normal and that it doesn't exist at the same time. Ableism teaches us to ignore the systemic and structural drivers of disability oppression, of violence, in favor of a hyper-individualistic approach to disability. Don't say these offensive words. Build a few ramps. Be a little nice to someone who might have a disability. And certainly, we should be cognizant and conscious of the language we use, the buildings that we work in, and how we treat other people. But at the end of the day, ableism is a systemic and a structural problem that changing a few words or building one ramp will not address. I also have questions about this ramp. Like, how steep is it? Is it cracked down the middle? Is there a railing? Is the railing wobbly? Is the ramp hidden behind the dumpster? Does anyone know where it is? How long is it? Is there a landing? Is it wide? Can you see it in the dark? Is there a tactile marker for where it's located? Like, I've got questions about this hypothetical one ramp. These are also real questions about real ramps that I and plenty of my friends and colleagues have been injured on. Building one ramp, especially without asking these questions and perhaps getting some answers for them, is not enough. It will not address ableism. Paying attention to some of the words that we use too will not fully or entirely address ableism either. I'm looking for the correct slide, not finding it. Found it. I knew it was in here. And now you know what it's like to be a student in one of my classes. Where is this stuff? It's a constant refrain. The image that you see on this screen is a black and white photograph of a mid-aged Black woman with a small afro and glasses speaking away from the screen. The text says, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." This is a quote from Audre Lorde, well known as a Black, lesbian, feminist, and womanist scholar, activist, and artist. What many people do not know about Audre Lorde is that she was also disabled. Like many freedom fighters, artists, and scholars who are moving us closer to liberation, We don't tend to tell those stories because they're not convenient. Not when we are all deeply invested in ableism, even in spaces that are ostensibly committed to the work of justice. Our struggles are connected. Disability justice teaches us that its first principle, as articulated by Patricia Berne, B-E-R-N-E, and others, its first principle is intersectionality, a recognition that our struggles and our movements are deeply interconnected. They inform one another. They shape one another. The crisis of ableism is an intersectional crisis. We cannot divorce our understanding of ableism from our understanding of other forms of oppression and violence. And similarly, we cannot divorce the work that we do from our understanding that our struggles and movements must be connected because our liberation must be collective. This is the last of the 10 principles of disability justice, collective liberation. The image on this screen is of a silver-haired elder with glasses, smiling warmly at the camera, wearing a bright pink scarf and white shirt. This is a picture of Lila, L-I-L-L-A, Watson, who is a Gangalu scholar, activist, and artist, G-A-N-G-U-L-U. She is an Indigenous Australian. That is the name of her nation. The quote on this slide says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." Disability justice teaches us that if the crisis of ableism is intersectional, then the work of liberation must also be intersectional. As my partner, Shane Neumeyer, S-H-A-I-N, Neumeyer, N-E-U-M-E-I-E-R, as Shane says, disability justice makes sure that we leave nobody behind. We leave nobody behind in our work. Disability justice invites us to consider what alternatives to this violent extraction might be. If we know that disabled people disproportionately face violence and deprivation in so many different areas of our lives, if we know that disability is disproportionately overrepresented in every other marginalized community there is, if we know that each and every one of us has been directly impacted by the expectation that we have to repeatedly prove our humanity and our personhood, that we have to be productive, that we have to perform, that we have to function in certain ways in order to be offered dignity or respect, then how do we build worlds and communities that offer alternatives for how we think about our work? What does it mean for us to instead center a value of care as a practice of justice, as an ethic of love, as a politic of liberation? What does it mean for us to reject the idea that only some people are worthy, that only some people deserve justice, that there will always only be enough resources for a handful of people, but never enough for the rest of us? What does it mean if we reject the idea that some people must always be expendable, that someone must always be disposable, that someone can always be left behind? What if instead we affirmatively and vehemently argued and fought for each and every one of us as indispensable and indisposable? I think of my own work for disability justice as deeply informed by the Jewish value of tikkun olam, T-I-K-K-U-N O-L-A-M. This means to repair the world. What does it mean for each one of us to accept the invitation to do what work we might, to give what offerings we have, to repair the ruptures and the harm present in the fabric of the world around us? How can we incorporate multimodality, care, and love into our advocacy, our teaching, our organizing, our relationships? Disability justice does not offer one answer, one set of answers, or a checklist. I know people ask me all the time for checklists. There isn't one. But it is an invitation to shift our framework, to shift our relationships, and to invite transformation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lydia. We have one question here. I'll read to you. I recognize the struggle you talked about when life and health get in the way of wage labor. As a lower level staff manager with power yet still existing within the context of academia, I try to give extensive flexibility to those dealing with different situations, including disability. I'm less confident in how to help my staff who cannot work at all for months at a time. And the question was, do you have advice for those with power for how to support staff as people first?
My answer is to always be flexible, right? In anything that you can do, be flexible, be creative. And frankly, I engage in and I encourage others to engage in malicious compliance. How can you comply with the rules technically, but maybe not the way the rules were intended or designed or what they contemplated doing? How can you comply in such a way that maximally recognizes humanity and makes space for precarity and messiness? For example, can deadlines be shifted? Can you be an advocate to the people who are higher level managers? Can you reorder or reorient particular goals or projects? Because the answer is you probably can. It's probably not a matter of life and death where something is going to go away forever if you don't do it immediately exactly on deadline as planned. There are some exceptions to that. There's things that can't be moved. But then the question is, how can you creatively address the work that needs to be done if a particular person is not able to do it? If a particular person could do it, but not in that timeline. And this is where collective work comes into play. You alone will not be able to single-handedly fix all of these problems or to take on all of the work that other employees who are your direct reports cannot do. But you, working with others, may be able to distribute the burden of work in such a way that it no longer falls solely on one person, one of your employees or you.
Why don't I take the next question? And this question comes from Mike Green. What is one or two things that we can do as instructors to create a safe and healthy learning environment for students with disabilities?
I strongly recommend two things here. One is incorporating multimodality from the very beginning of your course, allowing students more than one way to participate, allowing students more than one way to demonstrate their knowledge and their skills. For example, you could offer an alternative to a written assignment. For example, you could give students credit for giving written comments as well as for speaking out loud in class. Or you could allow for use of more than one material, not just readings, but perhaps audio recordings, podcasts, or videos that may be just as informative as an article, not as a substitute, but as an alternative option. And when you make those options available to all students, this benefits disabled students and avoids forcing disabled people to have to disclose as much or as often, but it also benefits everybody else too, by allowing students ownership in and investment in their own educational process, where students have the ability to make decisions in their coursework about whether they want to be challenged more or whether they need to do work that's a little bit easier for them to manage and that allows them to make that decision for themselves. The other thing that I recommend to instructors is to model disclosure so that students can understand that it is more normalized to talk about needs and not feel that they have to disclose a specific disability in order to ask for needs to be met. So one example of what I do in my own classes is, because I have a neurological disability called prosopagnosia, commonly known as face blindness, that basically means I don't recognize anyone, including my parents or spouse, reliably. So I certainly won't recognize my students. I tell them at the beginning of the semester, I don't recognize faces. Sometimes I tell them it's a neurological disability. And I say, I don't care where you sit in class, but you will always have name tent cards. If you don't have a name tent card, I will not know who you are. Whenever you raise your hand, I will stare at you and I will say you. I don't want to do that because that feels rude. So you need to have the name tent cards so that I know who you are. And I do that as a way of letting my students know both I am a person who has needs, but also this is a space where we're going to practice being able to talk about needs and ask for each other to support each other in making and meeting those needs.
Next question from Lisa Nove. As a member of the LGBTQ plus community, do you have advice on how to connect with other groups, such as people of color or people with disabilities?
If you build it, they will come. And if you expect people to come to you, they won't, if they don't have a reason to believe that your space is safer or welcoming. So one, explicitly advertise that you are inviting and welcome the participation and engagement of people from communities that may not be part of your specific community space or organization or group, and show up to other organizations and groups events, the public ones. I don't mean show up to a closed door event. Like if you're a white person and there's an event that is closed door session support for Asian American women, don't go to that. But if there's a cultural heritage dinner that is open to the public, go, because it's open to the public. And if you go, you'll be able to meet people and you'll be able to show I am interested in and invested in your community. And should you be interested, you are welcome to join in this other space that I help to curate and that I participate in too. But showing up means that you are demonstrating that you're not just saying you have to come over here. It means that you recognize that there are community spaces that you perhaps have not necessarily engaged in the past, and you could. I hope that that helps a little bit.
Right. We have another question. In a return to normal operations during the COVID-19 pandemic, our collective campus has conflated the word community with in-person. This is a justification for blanket edicts and policies for participation in person. There are exceptions that can be considered with the involvement of HR, which is not always viewed as a welcoming environment for problem solving. How might you view this from your lens of disability, intersectionality, and justice?
This is a deeply ableist way to interpret community, but it's also not unique to your university. This is a very common approach to thinking about community and in-person versus virtual work nationally and probably internationally now. And I would encourage you, wherever possible, to push back against that expectation on emails, in meetings, in conversations. Community can be in person, absolutely, but it also doesn't have to be. Especially if you happen to not be disabled, and I don't know, because you're anonymous, but for all of those who are listening, if you are not disabled, I encourage you to point out every single opportunity. What about disabled members of the community? What about chronically ill members of the community? How can we allow for multiple types of offerings, multiple types of social engagement, multiple types of learning opportunities? It's great to have in person for people who are excited about it and want to do it. And if there are COVID mitigation strategies in place, Like I don't advocate against that, assuming there's COVID mitigation strategies. But if that's the only modality of doing work, then you are advocating for the continued and possibly indefinite exclusion of the most vulnerable disabled people, and of poor disabled people, and of working disabled people, right? Like there are so many reasons that even before COVID-19, that many disabled people had always been asking for remote or hybrid participation opportunities and work. And we're told over and over again, no, that would be a burden on everybody else. It would be uncomfortable for everybody else. It would be too hard to do it. It will affect the culture. Well, I don't know about you all, but we spent a couple of years working mostly remote or hybrid. And last time I checked, we still got a lot of things done. And we learned that it's more sustainable to allow people options and choices for how we do our work and how we engage. We're virtual right now. And, speaking for myself, I think that I'm a good speaker in person or online, but like you all can weigh in. Like, do you think this has gone well? Do you think that you've been engaged, that you were able to pay attention over the last hour? Like, have I made you feel like, oh God, I can't pay attention to yet another Zoom during the last, I guess, a little over an hour we've been together? I've also done in-person engagements, right? I've done a lot of them, many years, and I enjoy doing it. But there's things you can get in person you don't get online, and there's things you can get online you don't get in person. So especially if you're not disabled, it's incumbent on you to push back against that narrative.
Lydia, I'll read one more question and then we'll take a break for 15 minutes and pick up again at 10:30. So for those of you who still have questions, we do have a breakout session and that you're all invited to at 10:30. Last question, what can I, as a Caucasian female with an able body, do to show support for change?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a brave question to ask too. And the answer is, I don't know you and your life. But what all of us can do, no matter what types of privilege we have or resources we have access to, and as a pause, right? Everybody here in this space has access to some form of privilege already just by being here. One, you have a university affiliation. That's a privilege. Two, you can communicate in proficient or fluent English. That's also a privilege. Three, you have an internet connection that's relatively reliable, which is also a privilege. So all of us here, no matter what other identities or experiences we hold, have at least 3 forms of privilege just by being here. So for all of us, no matter what other forms of privilege or resources you might have access to, we have to consider, what spaces do we live and work in? What relationships do we have? Because that is where your work to support change begins. In your working unit, in your classrooms, with your neighbors, with your friends. Because if your only conceptualization for change work is change policy, advocate about a law, condemn something a celebrity has done or a leader at the university has done, but we're not thinking about the spaces where we are implicated, where we have relationships, where we have real influence with our friends, with the people that we directly work with students or coworkers, then we're not actually thinking about the work of change in the spaces where we have capacity on a daily basis to be invested in change work.
Lydia, thank you very much. We're going to be taking a break till 10:30 and we'll be back with Lydia. If you have another question that you did not get answered, please keep those for our next session and we will see you at 10:30. Grab a cup of coffee or snack. As Lydia suggested, take care of yourself and we will see you in a few minutes. Thank you.
I've got my coffee.
Thank you, Lydia.
All right, let's go ahead and get started again. Lydia, we will turn it over to you.
Hello. This is Lydia. Just checking that everyone can hear me. Great. Okay, let me see if I can get this to pop up on screen. Okay. Again, and now you're getting a real taste for the Lydia Brown experience that my students have of where's my stuff? Also a common situation. So does anyone have a copy of the book? I can't find mine. That is also a very frequent comment made in class. And then students are like, why don't you have a copy of the book? It's like, well, I do, but I also have ADD. So hopefully someone else has it too. And this also happens with slides because, I don't take the desktop computer to campus. So it's like, where are my slides? Probably at home. All right. Want to talk through a bit of realities that often show up for disabled students and for your disabled colleagues, whether you yourself have a disability or not. Here are some, oh no, Zoom is like freezing on me and doing can you in the Zoom at the same time? I think I got kicked out of the Zoom. Did I get kicked out?
Oh, no, you're here. But you froze temporarily, but now you're back.
Yeah, Zoom gave me like 5 error messages in a row that said Zoom has quit unexpectedly. And I was like, cool, unhelpful.
You're still here. Everything's good.
All right, well, now I'm scared to try to share these slides again. Okay, I'm just like, maybe I just need to exit like 5 of the documents that are open. Like that could be a problem. It's also an ADD problem. Okay. Gonna try this again. I closed like 10 things. Let's hope this works.
It did.
Great. So some of the realities that might affect your students and your colleagues, whether or not you yourself have a disability, are that disabled people are more likely to experience multiple forms of bullying, harassment, and abuse. One study found that 94% of autistic students and their families reported severe bullying. We are more likely to be targeted for such bullying and to be profiled as scary or dangerous, even when we are the ones who are targeted. So I distinctly remember before college, when I was in middle school, the one time I got suspended was because after years of terrible bullying, I finally decided to try to make one of my bullies stop by threatening that I could make him bleed. I had no weapon and no plan to actually make him bleed. In fact, blood kind of scares me, but I uttered the words, "I will make you bleed." So I got suspended. For the bully, no consequences, not surprisingly. When I was in high school, I was falsely accused of planning a school shooting, which, for the record, 0 out of 10 do not recommend that experience. Like 0 out of 10, truly like not an experience that I wish to repeat or inflict upon anybody else. By the time that I was actually in college, one of the faculty at my school manufactured a story that I was so scary and had traumatized several other students that I needed to be removed from my intentional community dorm building. This literally never happened. The incidents that were described by this faculty member were that I was allegedly screaming at this other person in a meeting. The meeting had taken place, and I remember that I was so anxious during said meeting that I could barely make my voice louder than a whisper. So definitely didn't happen, but this was the story manufactured in an attempt to have me removed from the dormitory. And that is not an uncommon experience, those types of experiences for disabled people in the workplace or as students, to be profiled as scary and dangerous, even as we are often the targets of bullying and ostracism and abuse. We are more likely, especially those of us who are neurodivergent, to be gender nonconforming, regardless of our actual gender identity. We are also more likely to be questioning or out as transgender, non-binary, or genderqueer. There's actually some psychological research that's been done on this. We're more likely to struggle with new impairments and challenges at every single stage of life. So the transition into college or graduate school are often periods in which new experiences of chronic illness, disability, and madness often develop. It is also often the case if a significant life transition occurs after school as well, that we will experience changes physiologically and psychologically. This is just part of being an alive human being. But for disabled people, those shifts can be more marked and dramatic. We're more likely to be homeless or have unstable housing, which can include being forced to live with abusers. That can be abusive partners or abusive family or parents, family of origin. One study found that as many as 64% of people living on the streets might qualify for an autism diagnosis. We're more likely to be targeted for all forms of sexual abuse, assault, and harassment. People with developmental disabilities are at least 7 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than non-disabled people. The statistics collected on people with developmental disabilities and sexual assault are probably really outdated and likely underestimates, but the numbers that we have show that of those categorized as women by the researchers, anywhere between 83 to 94% have been sexually assaulted at least once. For those categorized as men, the number is almost 40%. For those, again, categorized as women, over half of those who have been sexually assaulted will have been assaulted at least 10 times by the age of 18 on average. And none of those numbers are disaggregated by sexual orientation, by whether someone is institutionalized or not, by race, or by other factors. Those are just overall numbers. We are more likely not just to struggle with new impairments and challenges as we transition through our lives, but to be disabled in multiple ways, in part because of the experience of abuse and trauma, which can create disabling experiences and cause new disabilities as well as exacerbate existing disabilities. We're more likely to be unemployed, underemployed, or precariously employed. The unemployment rate for disabled people is about twice that nationally of those who are not disabled. Again, for autistic people, which is my particular disability, we are actually one of only a handful of demographic groups for whom, with every subsequent level of educational attainment, our employment rate drops, which means that an autistic person with a doctorate degree is less likely to be employed than an autistic person who never completed a high school diploma. We die on average, autistic people, 3 decades younger than non-autistic people. And the second leading cause of our death is death by suicide. Disabled people writ large are more likely to be institutionalized or incarcerated in general. The Department of Justice itself acknowledges that 85% of incarcerated youth have a disability. 85%. And of incarcerated adults, both in jails and in prisons, which if you're not familiar, they're not actually the same thing, but that's a separate conversation. So in jails and prisons, depending on what statistic you're looking at and how they're defining disability, or if they're looking at only certain categories of disability, anywhere between 50 to 80% of people who are incarcerated in jails and prisons have at least one disability. And that's the same statistic, by the way, for the percentage of people killed by police who have a disability. So whether you personally have a disability or not, your students and your colleagues who do are disproportionately likely to be affected by these realities. To be a disabled person living in a profoundly ableist society means that we are constantly met with disbelief, with invalidation, with delegitimization, with deprivation, with neglect, and with exploitation at every possible turn and in every possible way. When I think about what it means for me as a member of faculty to engage with disabled students and disabled colleagues, I think first about trust and belief. And I remind myself of this mantra: trust our students, believe our students. So much of academia is built upon the logics of surveillance and carcerality. The belief that if we're not micromanaging, we can't trust people to do their work or be productive or not cheat. The belief that we have to ensure that people have a really true, legitimate reason to ask for an extension or to ask for flexibility on an assignment. Like, to the point where literally this semester alone, like just this semester, I've had students send me emails that said things like, I am currently in the ER. My car was hit and I was in it. Also, I'm having emergency surgery. These things are actually unrelated. And I'm like, why are you emailing me? Just don't come to class. I had another student email me literally last week saying that a close relative of theirs is in hospice and may die any day. And they're like explaining this in detail and saying, can I have an extension on the take-home midterm? And I'm like, why are you even caring about the midterm? Like, what is the purpose of caring about the midterm? And, you know, I understand that what's happening is they've been met with punitive reactions and presumptive disbelief and skepticism for their entire academic career. The assumption that you must be making it up. Do you have documentation? Like, I've had students that were told, bring the death certificate, bring the obituary, bring your ER discharge paperwork to prove that you really were in it. And I'm like, that is deeply personal, invasive information. Like, why are you asking for this? Like, I don't want this. Like, I tell my students in writing, verbally, and in writing to my syllabus, and I say it out loud and I say it more than once, you don't have to have documentation or give me an explanation. Just say that you need an extension. And like, there's a 99% chance I'm just going to say, sure, yeah, take the extension. And I still have students sending me this information. I had a student send me a scanned in copy of their discharge paperwork from the hospital once. And I was like, why are you sending me this very personal information that I do not need or want? Like, I don't need this information. And I know it's because my colleagues are demanding that they provide it. I know it's because my colleagues are saying it needs to be a truly serious, extreme exigent circumstance as defined by white, wealth-privileged, non-disabled people in order for them to say this is legitimate and we will allow you to have this extension or to take it incomplete or whatever it is the student is asking for. And I'm like, why? If a student says I need to have my computer out, I don't care, as long as it's not making noise. And if you're doing something that's not class related, you're not showing it to other students. Like, if you know you want to sit through class and mindlessly click through Amazon, that's not how I study, but you do you. Just don't show your screen to other students so that they're distracted. If you want to sit through class and fiddle with something, fine, as long as it's not making noise. I don't care. If you want to text all through class, I don't care, but maybe sit towards the back of the room so you're not distracting everybody else. I personally would not. I would feel rude as shit sitting there texting through class. I would not do that to my professors. But if you want to, I don't know what you're texting about or who you're texting, and it's not my business. Maybe it's something frivolous about your Thursday night party plans, or maybe you are texting your parents because your dog was rushed to the emergency vet. I don't know. And it's not my business. And if you don't want to be in the room, you can leave. I'm not stopping you. I've had students who are seniors in college say, do you mind if I go to the bathroom? And I'm like, does anybody desire for you to pee yourself in this college classroom? And the answer is no. There are zero people who desire for you to pee yourself in the college classroom in front of everyone else. Just go. Don't even say anything, just go. But the carceral logics of corporate academia teach us that students and workers alike are not to be trusted and not to be believed. we're not to be trusted, and we're not to be believed. And this forces students into these highly exploitative, terrible positions where they're constantly thinking, how do I prove that I legitimately need an accommodation or a flexibility in this class? I try to obviate the need for that by building it in from the beginning. My deadlines are guidelines. They're not set in concrete. They're guidelines to help you structure the semester. You could turn everything in at the end of the semester and still pass the class. I don't recommend it. Also, I will then be grading all of that, but I will do it. You will pass. You'll just probably get your grade 3 weeks after you're supposed to. And you and the registrar will both just have to accept that, because that's what's going to happen should you wait until the end of the semester to turn in all your work. I have had students do that. I tell my students I am not looking for ways to dock your points or dock your grade. This class is not an easy A, but it is also almost impossible to fail. You will pass, you will get a good grade if you do at least most of the work at some point this semester, in some way. But how you do it, that's up to you. I think I failed 2 students in the last 7 years. And I tell my students this. I tell them, here's why they failed. They turned in 0 work. They showed up once the entire semester. And then they replied to 0 emails ever from me, even asking, do you need to withdraw from this course? Do you need to talk to your dean about taking it incomplete? No response. In those scenarios, I had to fail the students. It is hard to fail my classes. That is intentional. I don't wish to recreate the punitive nature of academia that is so common for most of us. But in those scenarios, it's like, I can't manufacture a passing grade in that scenario. I can't. There's no way to manufacture one. But like, that is the level at which you fail. If you actually do any amount of work, you won't fail. Like, it is almost impossible to do so. But I try to encourage a culture, as I was talking about during our keynote, of multimodality and a culture of care in my room. These are the 6 specific strategies that I use to build access. I think about ways to enable anonymous disclosure and requests that do not have to be tied to disability, but they can. My students have access to a Google form throughout the semester where they don't have to put their name, but can give feedback or make requests. And I tell my students I cannot promise that I can respond to every request or incorporate every suggestion that I receive, because I'm one person, I'm human, and I'm also disabled. But I will read and listen to and take into account the requests that I receive. And that allows students to make requests they might not feel comfortable submitting with their name. It also allows them to make requests more than once. And it allows a student who does want to disclose a disability but not have their name attached to it to say so. Like, I had a student one year tell me that they very specifically have, I can't remember the name of the condition, but the type of condition, misophonia, that's what it's called, where they have a very extreme and averse reaction to certain noises. And one of their particular triggers is the sound of chewing. And they sent this message to me because I had invited my students, this was, I think, pre-pandemic, to be able to eat during class because my class met during dinner time. And so this student disclosed, actually, that's going to be really hard for me if I'm hearing the sounds of chewing. And so I then thought about, how can I be flexible and adaptive to both account for the fact that this class meets during dinner time and people might need to eat, and this other student deserves not to have to worry about having their misophonia triggered every single class. And what we came up with was a stopgap solution that avoided ever having time where the only sound would be people chewing, and asking people that if they wanted to just eat quietly to leave the room to do so without disclosing the person's disability. Just saying these will be the expectations for class. And that's a way, again, of allowing for anonymous requests and being flexible and adaptive in how we approach the classroom space. And in general, this is a strategy that we should use in spaces other than the classroom too. I seek to eliminate gatekeeping by telling my students that you don't have to be registered with disability support services in order to request accommodations or support, because there are a million reasons why students may not feel comfortable registering, or they may not be able to. Perhaps they don't have access to paperwork, or it's not safe for them to seek a diagnosis because they're on an abusive parent's insurance, or they don't have money, or because of racial and gender disparities, they won't be recognized and accurately diagnosed. There's so many different reasons why. So you don't have to have documentation to request and receive accommodations in my classrooms. Although obviously I will accept them if you have it. And if you want to give me an accommodations letter, I will read it and I will talk to you about it. I think about our classroom structure in terms of space, time, resources, and movement. And I build in access from the very beginning. I don't think of access as an afterthought. I build access in my course design, in my instructional design, in my pedagogy, as well as in my choice of curricular materials, so that a lot of requests for accommodations become unnecessary. If you need access to captions, it's not an issue, because when I have Zoom open, I always have captions. I use captions myself as someone who has an auditory processing disability. I don't play uncaptioned videos in my classes. If you're a student who needs extra time, my deadlines are already flexible. So you take the time that you need and then turn it in. And frankly, I have enough ADD where I might not notice, to be quite honest. Like, I tell my students that sometimes, like, if you turn it in a day or two after the deadline, I honestly may not realize that it's a day or two after the deadline. Like, I have that much ADD here. Please tell me I'm not alone in this Zoom. Where are my other ADD people at? There was fully a day this fall where an actual comment that I made to one of my colleagues was, why do I suddenly have 20 emails from my students today? Followed by, oh, I think something was due today. Because that is ADD and teaching with ADD. It's like, oh, I didn't even remember that. And then a student was like, can I have an extension? And I was like, oh, I didn't remember it was due today. So yeah, I mean, sure. I frankly was confused by the emails. And lastly here, I think about modeling relational access. How we model relational access. This is a learning that I've done in my own work, and I've grown a lot. And it's also informed by the work of colleagues and friends like Mimi Cook, who I quoted in the keynote, and Amy Hamrai, who describes access as a relational process, as a relational concept. Because access requires us to be in relationship with each other. Access is not individual. Access is not merely a one-size-fits-all or a checklist, but access is situational, it's contextual, it's flexible, it's fluid, and it occurs in the context of relationships. An example that I give of this often is how to navigate a scenario in which perhaps one person relies upon their service dog to detect seizures, or to protect them from injuries if they are a fall risk, or for navigation, mobility, and orientation as a blind person. They rely on their service dog to perform those tasks. And another person experiences severe PTSD because of a dog attack. PTSD is also a recognized disability. It's a disabling experience. Perhaps the dog attack was because of a neighbor or an untrained person, or maybe it was because of police violence. And so I will invite people often to think about, what do you do in this scenario? If you are teaching, or if you are organizing a conference, or if you're just colleagues of both of these people, how do you enable them to both have their needs met, and for neither of them to feel excluded or banned from participating in person if they wish to be in person? When these are very clearly conflicting access needs, the one person relies upon their dog to support them as a disabled person, and knowing that they don't knowing that their dog will not be questioned, that they will not be interrogated about their dog, that their dog will be welcome and there will be physical space for their dog to relieve themselves, is a necessity for them to feel welcome. And the other person, in order to feel welcome and safe and accommodated, knows that they need to be assured there will not be dogs present. They won't have to ask about it. They won't be forced to disclose their deep trauma in order to be taken seriously about their request not to be near dogs. Because we as disabled people, and all of you who are here who have a disability, you know this, we are forced to disclose so much invasive information all the time just to demand basic access, and it often is not even met. And so how do we make both of those types of people feel welcome and supported and not interrogated and not forced to disclose deeply personal information? That's an open question. I'll let you contemplate it. I actually think that there are hands raised from 2 people, and because we're in webinar format, I think that means that you have to be explicitly allowed to speak, or you can type a question. I don't, one of those 2 things I think has to happen because we're not in a meeting format. There's a hand from Mike Green and a hand from Allie.
Okay. Let me see.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your presentation. I had my hand up just saying I'm ADD as well, and it is a challenge. But by admitting it to my students, I have to say that I've had this amazing experience where the way I accommodate my ADD is not the same as they do, but they appreciate seeing a person who has kind of made it in academics or in a career who struggles with it. Because I think I've always been very good at hiding my disabilities. It's a strange skill I have, is passing, right, or acting. And I've changed that over the last few years. In fact, I can't show you on video, but every meeting I have and every lecture I have a card next to me that just says stay on script. So that for students without ADD or those with, I'm actually on message and not having too many tangents, to say the least. Yeah. So I was raising my hand for ADD, but I wanted to add that comment. I appreciated that.
That's a great strategy, and I might need to incorporate something like that because I think my students are both fascinated by my ADHD tangents and possibly like, yeah, but can we go back to talking about the text?
That's it. Yeah, they're very nice because I had some typos on my previous exam, and a few students very nicely asked me through an anonymous survey I provide, could you maybe have a colleague look over your exams first? It's like, yeah, I can. I'll work on it. But it's fair enough, right?
Right. Yeah, I think my truly impressive moment probably has been, well, just being like, why are you all emailing me? Because the paper was due today? Oh. I think I get like ADHD Olympics points for that one. Yeah. Allie, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
No, I didn't have a question. I was just doing the same thing. I relate to having ADD, and I'm a student, so sometimes it's kind of difficult or hard, but I was just saying that I relate.
When I was a student, I had the same kinds of problems too, except in reverse. I remember I was dying of embarrassment my freshman fall of college, right? And I was in a freshman seminar around November, mid-November. I come to class, and the other 14 students in this seminar have this nice little thick packet of paper that's neatly printed and stapled on their desks. And I'm thinking, what's that? So I lean over to look at the desk of the person sitting next to me, and I see at the top this little header block that has that person's name, the professor's name, the title of the class, and a date. And I'm thinking, oh no. And the professor walks in, sure enough, and says, all right, everyone, please hand in your final papers. And I'm thinking, final paper? Huh? What final paper? And so she comes to me and she's like, where's your paper? And I was like, so I didn't realize that we had one, let alone that it was due today, probably because she had verbally given us the assignment. And as you know, verbal information can be disastrous for ADHD.
Oh yeah, I
right?
struggle with that a lot. Yeah.
It had probably been assigned verbally because it wasn't in the syllabus, right? And I was like, I didn't know about this. Is there any chance that I can work on it over the next few days and then give you a paper? And I have to wonder if that particular professor also had ADHD because of many other interactions that I had with her during that fall semester. But she was like, okay, if you can send it tomorrow, day after, maybe day after that. And I was thinking, as this freshman who was just dying of embarrassment because this conversation was in front of the entire class, just thinking, yep, that will be what I am doing tonight and tomorrow because I didn't know about this and now I'm embarrassed. But that I do distinctly remember that fall first year of college where I just truly didn't remember that. There's actually a relevant question from Owen who asked, fellow ADHD are here, yeah, representation, but also wondering, how do you deal with the tension between having super flexible deadlines, which are, among other things, important for students with executive function differences, including ADHD, with the way that having such easily extended flexible deadlines can easily be disastrous for, many students with ADHD. Here's my answer to that question. I used to have the policy that there were no deadlines in my class and that you could turn in your work whenever, as long as it was before the end of the semester. And I received feedback from several of my other ADD and other learning disabled students that this was bad, actually. That some level of flexibility is really good and helpful and made them feel a little less stressed. But being told there are no deadlines, it's a free-for-all, was bad, was the bad kind of chaos. So I implemented my current system over the last 2 semesters to account for that feedback. And I give my students specific deadlines that are written in the syllabus. This assignment is due September 23rd. This assignment is due October 28th, etc. And then I tell them, if you need additional time because that doesn't work for you, send me an email with your new proposed deadline. And then I also tell them, this is the drop dead deadline, which is a day in the middle of the finals period. This is the last day to turn in work for this class. And so that attempts to mediate between those differences by giving deadlines, but also letting students know you can ask for extensions. They will pretty much always be granted, but there is an official deadline. This is when it's due. And then here's the absolute drop dead deadline for if you're really late on turning something in. This is the last day that you can turn it in, and I'll still be able to grade it in a minimally reasonable amount of time, as defined by me, not the registrar. I think the registrar has a very different definition of reasonable than I do, and probably many faculty. And I'm hoping we're going to see this semester how this turns out as well, that this will have been helpful in allowing students the ability to have the built-in external structure, but also have built-in flexibility at the same time. And just observing what work has been turned in, I think it is helping many of my students, because I would say that about 2/3 to 3/4 of students for any given assignment are turning in their work the day of the deadline or the day afterward. And the other 1/4 to 1/3 are asking for an extension, which is automatically granted. I did actually want to try to lead you all through an exercise that I think might be difficult to do because we're in webinar formats. That might not happen, but I do see a couple of other questions just came in too. So one anonymous person is saying, how do students with ADD or ADHD communicate their need to their professors to be able to turn in assignments late? I'm actually not sure what you're asking. Are you asking what are things that students say, or are you asking for advice about how to communicate this to a professor? Those are 2 different questions, and I'm not sure which one is intended. Marcella Schiffelin, excuse me if I didn't pronounce that right, said there are more places of higher education who have wellness coaches, college coaches, or career coaches, lots of different names. for, I believe, a similar goal to support a student from the time they enter college until they graduate, and even perhaps follow up as alumni. Can you speak to the idea of these college coaches, can't speak, and what you would see as the best use of a coach? I think that type of coaching is extraordinarily helpful when it's trauma informed, and at least some of the people who are working in those jobs have experienced themselves or with people close to them what it means to be disabled in education, because a success coach who does not understand ADHD will not be able to help me. All of their advice will be useless to me and probably to many other people with ADD. A college coach who has never experienced marginalization in any significant way will not be able to support students who come from marginalized communities. Their advice might be geared toward an assumption of access to privilege and resources that does not hold up. So I think that those types of coaches are useful and valuable in the college context, but their utility and how much they can be helpful for students can depend greatly upon their ability to relate to and to give useful and informative and responsive advice for students who are dealing with experiences of marginalization. And in my experience, it's a hit or miss. You're rolling the dice when you meet with a coach if you don't know what their background is and what their community might be like, their experience with your community too. I also know that at one college, and probably not the only one that I've worked with, there was a situation where the college offered ADD specific coaching for students, but only if you could pay an additional fee, which of course is a massive barrier to many students who just didn't have those financial resources. Let me see. There's a bunch of other questions coming in too. Owen says, follow up to my previous question, but also related to the last commentary from Mike. So Mike had said, I'm colluding with others like Colleen to move beyond the minimal legal requirements of the ADA into a culture where differences like disabilities are valued and let's even hope normal in others' view of us. And Owen says, have you or has anyone you know ever considered having different recommended, opt-in but not stipulated sections of the same class designated for, say, 1, students who appreciate tangents and more spontaneous lecture style, as well as who strongly prefer side chatter in online but synchronous classes as a form of engagement rather than distraction, or a means of absorbing extraneous questions and commentary rather than risk blurting them out or getting distracted trying to remember or hold them in. And 2, students who need more structure and staying on script and who would get horribly distracted or overwhelmed by Zoom chat. Oh, Owen says the other Mike who would come on screen. I realize there's more than one Mike. That is a common name. That makes sense. So I haven't done that explicitly, but I do incorporate tools in my class to try to address that tension, because I'm actually both of those at the same time myself, as a student and as a worker, where a lot of chat messages are really overwhelming and distracting to me, but also I will blurt things out. And as a student in middle and high school, I got in trouble all the time. I would blurt things out because I couldn't hold it in, and I didn't want to forget it, and I wanted to say it, and I wanted to share it immediately. So I, in all of my classes, use a shared Google document that all students have access to at all times, so that students can always share commentary and questions in that document, as well as take notes. And there's a designated note taker every single class in that document. That's another way of sharing access responsibilities in class and making sure that no matter who you are, there's always a record of class notes, whether you get an accommodation for that or not. That if you missed class because you're a student athlete, or you had a family illness, or you had COVID, that you will still have a way to review notes from the class. But that document also provides a way for students to add real-time commentary and questions that might feel distracting, or they might feel a little self-conscious about in a Zoom bar. and that document is accessible to students whether we're meeting on Zoom or physically in the classroom. Either way, all students can access that. And so that is a tool that I don't think fixes the problem, but it helps to address that tension so that students are able to engage in a way that feels more valuable. So like if a student is distracted by the document, they don't have to look at it, or they can look at it after class instead. If a student wants to have it open because they can add a lot of questions and comments directly in as we're talking, then they can do that. And I'm able to review that in real time. So I usually have it up on my screen during class as well. But I do try in my classes as an instructor to incorporate both more structured modality in class as well as unstructured conversation. And I recognize, right, that one way of teaching or learning is not going to work for everybody. And any particular strategy, there's going to be people that it will not work for. But at the same time, I don't have the capacity, say, to teach 3 sections of one class. I couldn't do that. And I'm an adjunct, so I don't know if that was clear. I think it was mentioned in my bio when I was introduced. So I'm not working full-time in an academic context. So I have a little bit of a different situation than someone who might be a salaried member full-time of faculty, who might be able to think through, let's teach 2 sections of this class, or have a TA, if a TA is assigned, assist with this. But certainly I think that's a great idea for a faculty member that does have that time and the support of their department or program. If they're able to do that, I think the only thing that would be difficult in that scenario is that every student may not know necessarily what learning style works best for them. Some students are very self-aware and they know what works for them. And other students are still figuring it out, and they won't know until they're in a classroom where it's not working that well, like, this is what doesn't work for me. Or, oh man, this is the first class I've been in where it works perfectly for my learning style. Yeah, so, and I'm seeing Owen saying, I'm student number 1 all day long, but I feel for the student number 2s and want to be conscientious about their needs and to recognize I might not always hear from them. I've heard from both of them, and I am both of those students, but at the same time, and currently as faculty, which is a very fascinating place to be in. So the person who had anonymously asked earlier clarified advice for how to communicate to professors for students who have ADD or ADHD and have a need to be able to turn in assignments late. And so what I'm going to say to you, anonymous person who asked that question, is unfortunately, I cannot give you one set of instructions or advice that will definitely work for all professors and all classes, because that's just not true. You're going to have professors, and you've probably already experienced this, assuming you're a student, who are more compassionate and empathetic, and professors that are, for lack of a better term, dicks. You're going to have both. I had both. And with that being said, right, there are professors that will really appreciate it if you are able to get documentation from the Disability Support Office that says that you have a particular need. You may not have that documentation. You may not want to give it to a professor, even if you do have it. And there are professors who don't give a shit. You could have all the documentation and they'll say, well, that's not how my class works. And there are other professors who will say, it doesn't matter to me, like, of course you can have the time, but you won't know which kind they are unless they either tell you that up front in the beginning of the semester or you ask. Now, a strategy that I have used as a professional is that sometimes I will ask for my need to be met without making it explicitly about a disability. For example, I might say, I'm having a really hard time with these deadlines. I'm working really hard to meet them. Let me show you the progress I've done so far on this paper, but it's going to be very hard for me to turn it in on this date. Is there any possible way that I could turn it in a couple days later? I promise that I am working on it. I have a plan. Here's what I've done so far, even if it's just a bullet point outline, or even if it's a list of sources that I'm looking up and planning to research, so that I can demonstrate I am doing some work. I'm not just trying to get out of doing the assignment, but I am having a hard time with this particular deadline. I might say, if it's true, I have 4 classes And there are also 3 midterms that are scheduled the day before and the day after this deadline. And I can't move the midterm exams. Would it be possible to consider moving this deadline by just a couple days so that I'm able to give it my best work? And I might frame it in that way so that the professor knows I'm truly trying to give you good work. That's why I'm asking for the extra time. I want to give you an assignment that is not going to be painful for you to grade, and where I can actually devote my time and attention to doing it. And I won't be able to do it on the original date that's listed. That may not work. You might get professors who will say, well, how dare you prioritize other classes? But you also might get professors that are willing to budge a little bit, like, well, you know, I don't want to create a situation where it's unfair to your classmates, but if you need 1 extra day, I can give you 1 extra day. Or I'll let you take a couple extra days, but in exchange, I'm going to take your grade down by a step. So if it would have been an A-, it'll be a B+. And at least for me, when I was a student, I didn't care about that as much. Like a B+ is still a great grade, and it's certainly a passing grade. Like, I'll take the B+, it's fine. And I can have the extra couple days. And so it's really just going to be a situational scenario for you as to what's going to end up being effective and how your professors might respond to that question. But I hope that's helpful a little bit in thinking through how you might approach it. There's another anonymous person that asked, what do you think about faculty providing a specific accommodation that other faculty may not provide in the future? And that might set a legal precedent for the college for that accommodation, not talking about built-in accommodations. And my answer to that is always going to be, if an institution is more concerned with avoiding legal liability or what the cost of providing a specific accommodation might be, if it costs something to implement it, I don't care, because access should not be contingent upon legal compliance or how much money it costs. And I say that with the caveat being, a university is in a very different position in terms of paying money than, say, an individual professor. An individual professor, contingent or not, shouldn't be responsible for paying out of pocket the cost of an accommodation. A small community organization may have very real cost limitations. If the total annual budget is $19,000 and that includes the part-time salary for your 1 part-time staff member, it might actually be a legitimate financial hardship to, say, pay for ASL interpretation or cart captioning in that context, or to pay for a physical modification to a building that you're renting and you're paying $300 a month in rent out of your $19,000 total a year. But you may not be able to implement that specific physical modification to the space. But a university, even one that is dealing with budgetary issues, will have more flexibility and more resources to pay for those costs. And the people that are in positions of decision-making power, which perhaps includes some folks who are here now, and maybe others who will be listening to this later, I want you to understand that disabled people have been saying for a really long time that when we're met with arguments or skepticism about accommodations that might cost money, that might require significant investment, and that might not be feasible to do as a given, but are doing on an ad hoc basis, on a case-by-case basis, and we're met with comments about, well, that's going to cost a whole lot of money, or that'll be really expensive, or that's going to be very complicated to undertake. The message that we hear as disabled people is, your access isn't worth it. Your participation is not worth it. And that's not the message that we want our universities to be sending. And that is my answer as a disabled person and also as a lawyer. If it creates a legal obligation or precedent for that school to provide the accommodation in the future, good. It should. Let's see. So Mike Green had asked that question, what are a few things we can do as faculty to create a culture that is safe and effective for those of us who are disabled? Well, right now in this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, encourage and demand that your departments, programs, of faculty governance, and your scholarly professional associations offer remote and hybrid access options for meetings and for conferences. Please, for the love of literally everything that is holy and also unholy, please ask your associations to give meaningful remote and hybrid access to our annual meetings, to our faculty development workshops, to your faculty governance meetings within the university. Because if we don't have that access, whether related to COVID or other disability-related reasons, disabled faculty and colleagues, many of us will continue to be excluded. We will continue to be told that our safety and our health is a secondary concern, if a concern at all. And that is not a sustainable environment. And if you are part of a meeting planning committee, you are organizing a symposium or an annual meeting, remote and hybrid access does not mean schedule all the remote panels for the same date and time. It does not mean have a separate segregated virtual conference and don't do any live streaming of the in-person sessions, because that's still a way of enforcing ableist exclusion and segregation. That's one. For another, it is creating an environment where we can be flexible about what counts as work. If someone is working on the tenure clock, can we be creative about what counts as service, about what counts as a publication to be recognized in a person's tenure or promotion file? Because that creativity might mean the difference between a disabled faculty member, especially one that's very engaged in the community, being able to be considered for tenure or promotion or not. We have a tendency in academic spaces to prioritize very specific types of production, of publication and service, to the exclusion of others, like Harvard University famously denying tenure to Cornell West, probably in large part because many of his publications are public scholarship. Public scholarship is scholarship and should be considered when we're thinking about someone's tenure and promotion file. Thinking about what benefits we offer to part-time and contingent faculty. Disabled and chronically ill colleagues are reliant upon access to healthcare. But if you're adjuncting at 3 institutions, which by the way is my situation right now, none of them are giving you healthcare. Where are you getting insurance from? How are you going to be able to see doctors that you're more likely to rely upon being able to see and receive care from if you're not able to get insurance coverage? How are you able to guarantee you're going to have any income if you're not in a full-time position, if you're in a semester job or a year-to-year contract? How are we addressing pay inequities between tenure line faculty and full-time non-tenure line faculty? These are all questions that deeply implicate disability justice as well as economic justice. These are a handful of comments and reflections. We could have a conversation about this, I'm sure, for hours and hours and hours, but I don't want to continue talking about this to the exclusion of some of the other comments that folks are sharing. But Mike, I hope that that is helpful a little bit. Grace is asking, in what ways do I incorporate care, understanding, and love with others and myself? Well, I work really hard to set some basic boundaries for my own life and work. I sleep 7 hours every night, except in exigent circumstances, even if that means not finishing work, even if that means being late, even if that means not replying to emails right away. I sleep 7 hours every night. Oh, which reminds me, have I still not signed paperwork for UC Denver? Legitimate question.
Yes, you're still not signed the paperwork.
So I need to sign that paperwork to get paid for today. Hashtag ADD problems. Okay, remembering that. I need to do that. Note to self, sign paperwork today. Well, I sleep 7 hours every night, except for extremely exigent circumstances. I feed myself and I try to make sure that other people in my life eat food and eat meals as well, because this is important. And I love to make food for other people. So if any of you are ever traveling to the Baltimore or Philadelphia region, like, let me know. Food might be an option. I make everything from scratch here. Yeah. Yeah, universities that are not mandating COVID vaccines, that are almost every university has lifted mask mandates for indoors situations. They're literally making all of us into petri dishes for the next variants of COVID-19. And like, I'm not interested in being a petri dish for the next version of COVID. Like, I'm not interested. And I don't want anyone else to be either. But this is a way in which our universities have completely neglected and abandoned care for all of us. And I want to share with you this article from Mia Mingus that was written a few months ago. If I can find it. It was right there, and now it's not there. I'm going to leave that in the chat for you if I can find it, which there it is now. I'm going to leave these links here in the chat for you all. And this other one that was just published probably in the last couple of weeks from Leah Lakshmi Pyachna Samarasinghe on our current COVID denial realities. So please enjoy those two readings. Consider that assigned reading for today. For everybody who's here. There is no report and there is no exam, but it's still assigned.
Lydia, we've got two in question and answers too. First one is anonymous. How can students with school trauma navigate university successfully, and what can professors do to accommodate trauma around education?
So again, there's no one way to move through university as a survivor of trauma, because what that looks like for every person will be very different. Each person who survived trauma will have a very different way of inhabiting the world. The trauma will affect them differently, and therefore it will show up differently when they're in the university environment. But what I can suggest are learn what grounding strategies work for you. Learn what your limits are to the extent that you can. Give yourself grace and compassion for attending to your needs. And when necessary, ask your professors and your classmates for their support in implementing little strategies that can make it a bit easier for you to address what your limitations are. Like, for example, you can ask your professors for content notes in their course content. There are professors that will be hostile to this and won't want to do it. If possible, don't take their classes. If unavoidable, honestly, this is my opinion as a member of faculty, skip liberally. You can probably still pass the class, and C's get degrees, which is something that academic advising deans may not tell you. C's get degrees. And if you need to skip a bunch of classes in order to not be horrifically re-traumatized by a professor that doesn't care about trauma and is not compassionate, just skip the classes. Do the minimal necessary to move through that class. And if you're a member of faculty, I really encourage you as much as possible to provide content notes on your course content to the extent that you can. I encourage you to make space for students to know that for any reason, they're allowed to take breaks in your class to come in and come out. If you don't want to have a completely flexible attendance policy, which is what I do, because it's important that students might need to be in your class a certain number of times, I really recommend giving students a set number of days that they can take no questions asked, at least as a bare minimum. like there are 3 or 4 days this semester where you can just not show up and it will not count against you at all. Just you choose the day and just don't come. And if it's possible for you to be more flexible than that, then do that, because that lets students decide for themselves, like when they will be in class, if they needed to duck out, if they know in advance, like this is the week that this professor will be describing, for example, the history of eugenics, or the professor will be talking about sexual violence, then I'm just not going to come. The professor will be dealing with, the professor will be talking about, for example, abuses of disabled children in school, and I'm just not going to go. And if the trauma is specifically related to school, then I think it is important to the extent you can. And this is where having supportive friends is helpful if you have them. If you have access to a therapist who's supportive and understands trauma, this can also be helpful to understand what specific aspects of your school experience were traumatizing and what strategies you can use to mitigate the effect of that trauma in your current life as a student. And since I won't know what that is, right, like I'm assuming that that might be relevant to you, the anonymous person who asked, I don't know what that looks like. So I'm not going to be able to give you more specific advice. But I certainly would suggest, thinking through like what are the things that are traumatizing and re-traumatizing and trigger more anxiety related to being at the university. And then you can work backward from there. What are strategies that would make this feel safer, that would make it feel more navigable? If you're looking for support professionally as well, I do have a recommendation for anyone who's looking for evaluation and support. Their name is Casey Gallagher. They are an openly autistic and trans clinical social worker, and they do, hold on, I can't type and talk, ADD. I put their name and email address in the chat box. They do evaluations, including recommendations for management at school and work for a wide range of experiences of neurodivergence from a non-pathologizing perspective, and they work on a sliding scale. So they don't provide free services, so that may not be accessible to everybody for a wide range of reasons. But if you have some access to finances, they work on a sliding scale, and I definitely recommend them as a helpful resource. Full disclosure, I get zero benefits from recommending them, like none. Like I don't work directly with them or their organization. So that is just a genuine recommendation, no financial incentive. I hope that's a little bit helpful to the anonymous person. Sophie asked, I'm a junior faculty member, also adjuncting at multiple universities, recently diagnosed with ADHD. How do you handle disclosing a diagnosis and asking for accommodations? And what kind of accommodations are even possible when you're at the early stages of your career without job security? Okay, a couple of comments. One, there's a great list of some possible accommodations in Margaret Price's book, Mad at School. I strongly recommend it. If you don't have a copy, I definitely have PDFs, or you could just ask Margaret nicely. She's at Ohio State and responds to emails, and she's a lovely human being. There's also a really great book recently published by Jay Dolmage called Academic Ableism. Dolmage is Dolmage. And there's a couple of books that were just published in the last couple months addressing specifically the job market for disabled academics, and another one addressing, I think, publishing and writing as a disabled academic. So if someone asks me about that later, I can provide that information. Actually, I think one of them might be open in one of my million tabs. Is it open? As I look through 80 million tabs. Aha, here's one of them, Disability and the Academic Job Market, edited by Chris McGunigle, McGunnigle. I think the other one's open somewhere too. Oh, the other one is also open. It's not explicitly about academia, it's activist affordances by Arsely Dokamachi, Arseli Dokumaci. Enjoy. I knew those were open in my million tabs, somewhere in there. But so a couple of things that have helped me as someone with ADHD, I do a lot better with courses that meet once a week, even for a longer amount of time, than courses that meet 2 or 3 times a week. Because having a single point to anchor my preparation and work for is more accessible for my version of neurodivergence. That might be true for you, it might not be true for you, right? But I think through, and I would encourage you to think through, what are the conditions in which you work really well? And then how can you ask to make those conditions possible? So for example, if you know that you need an extra day on the weekend to recover from teaching, then making sure you're not scheduled on either a Friday or a Monday would be important. Or alternately, if you know you need a day in the middle of the week that's low key and no teaching, try to avoid getting scheduled on Wednesdays, right? So it's basically an invitation to you to think through, how do I work well and effectively? What has been ineffective and unhelpful in how I work? And then what are ways that I can try to manufacture the conditions that will help me work at my best, whether or not you explicitly exclude having ADHD. You don't have to, for example, say, I have ADHD, to say, can I be scheduled not on Wednesdays? You just say, can I just not be scheduled on Wednesdays? Is that possible? But I do suggest looking through those other resources as well for some additional ideas. I know that there's, again, a couple of other questions, and we could spend longer troubleshooting ADHD and accommodations as junior faculty, but please feel free to reach out to me separately, but also caveat, 1, I'm teaching at multiple institutions and may not reply to you in the next couple weeks. 2, I'm running for office. Election day is on Tuesday. So I really like in the next however many days it is between now and election day. But you are welcome to reach out. And I will respond when ADD makes it possible for me to respond. Owen asks, you've discussed aspects of teaching and learning while disabled that cross any discipline or institution, but could you speak to anything related to the field of disability studies as an academic discipline and its presence or not within higher ed institutions? If it sounds vague and open-ended, it is, smiley face with tongue sticking out. Oh man, we could have a whole other conversation about the marginalization of disability studies within institutions, and how disability studies, like many area studies programs in cultural studies and critical studies of race and gender, for example, are chronically underfunded, under-resourced, and under-supported. But I will say I am concerned about 2 issues that arise within academic disability studies primarily. One is the co-optation of the phrase disability studies for fields of study and programs that are not actually about the study of disability in society and culture, but are, for example, a way of rebranding rehabilitation science or special education or early intervention, none of which are disability studies. Even though courses in all those areas are about disability, that is not the field of disability studies. Like a course on, I don't know, obstetrics and gynecology is arguably a course related to women's and gender studies. It's not a women's and gender studies course. It's a course for health professionals on obstetrics and gynecology. And so that's one issue that happens a lot. The other, oh yeah, Owen mentioned the Disabled Academic Collective, which you should all join. I'm in it on the Discord somewhere. I forget about Discord a lot, even though it's open on my phone. The other trend that I find harmful, but is very common in disability studies, pointed out, years ago by Chris Bell, and continues to be pointed out by many scholars of color and disability studies, is the overwhelming whiteness of disability studies as a field and as an academic discipline. Like even at the institutions where I teach, vanishingly few faculty who are teaching in disability studies are people of color, let alone disabled people of color. And that is a problem for the future of the field, but also for what our students are learning and for how they're engaging with disability. So those are two major issue areas that I've witnessed and I have concerns about, and those concerns are echoed and shared by many other scholars in the field of disability studies. I think we're at time, and I need to shove food in my face and go hand out campaign literature.
Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today, Lydia. We really appreciate this, and hopefully we'll be in contact with you as we start doing our own extended work in accessibility and the rest of the networks that are provided throughout the nation as we work on accessibility at universities in general. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you. And Colleen, both of these sessions will be made available through our website, right?
Yes, please, because they have to be they have to be processed and loaded up and that, but everything that we're doing in the next 2 days, except for the open forums, which are meant to be private, safe spaces, which are tomorrow afternoon, all of the rest will be on our faculty disability page as soon as we can get things processed and loaded up there. I'd say give it, like 7 to 10 days or so. We should have things up.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Lydia, for sharing so many important thoughts with us and also concrete strategies on how to improve our teaching.
I am really glad to be able to spend this time with you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm looking for the email with the paperwork right now, like literally right now.
UCD will haunt you with paperwork. Don't worry about that.
I'll take care. We'll take care of it, Lydia. Don't worry about it. You and I, you got multiple emails, but we'll get it taken care of.
I found it. And I'm sending you apparently my W-9 and an invoice for our session. I'm going to create the invoice right now while I'm thinking about it, and you're there. This is an ADD strategy for all of you who don't know about ADD. We have to do this. Like, no, you're here. We're doing it now. I actually just got a phone call yesterday. This is the funniest thing, from a college that shall not be named that was like, so we tried to pay you in 2019 and didn't succeed. Can we still pay you? Like, we need to pay you. And I was like, I didn't even remember this. So sure, a check would be wonderful and will help cover bills. Great.
All right, Colleen, should we end the webinar at this point? Okay. So how do we do that?
People can people can leave and we can turn the leave off. I usually stay till the end in case anybody, like if Lydia and I want to make sure the paperwork's done, but people can certainly leave.
And you should probably stop the recording.
I was going to say, that was the next thing I was going to say is to go ahead and stop the recording. Yeah. Which I think Mike can do.
Yep. Mike, if you could, please. Thank you.